Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what I'm displaying out here is my newest addition to my wormery and my worm feedings. It's a homemade worm chow, combination of different things that I ran through my little personal blender, and some of the things that I used are shown right here. This is pulverized oats. These are, I believe, they're pulverized pumpkin seeds. This is pulverized buckwheat, which was evidently the favorite of all the different things they got. The oats, I believe, I would classify as possibly being one of the lesser liked items, and the reason I know that is thanks to this system that you see right down here. We ran a test in here for 3 weeks so that we could compare all those different ingredients before we could combine them into a chow. I mean, it didn't really matter. I knew one way or another all the material would get eaten. But now I have a sense of which ingredient they like the best and which one they favor the least. So now I've been, just feeding them with... Now, actually, no, these guys haven't actually received the combined chow. I did sort of bring it up last time we fed them 15 days ago. I did even hint at maybe giving them some, but we didn't. What we gave them was strawberry, apple. So I want to get this thing up here, see how that feeding from 15 days ago of apple and strawberries coming along. Chances are they're going to need a little bit more food, probably some more grit. So let's get that thing up onto the bench and get them fed. The reason I've got newspaper over here is because in addition to checking out the worms, I'd also like to check in on the castings that they left behind, that they were evacuated from, and in which I'm assuming that they left a whole bunch of cocoons. So their cocoon nursery is one that we didn't really spend a lot of time on lately, other than baiting it 8 days ago, so I'm curious to see how that's coming along, so we'll check on that at the end. I mentioned earlier how I believe that the system probably needs grit, and my reason for thinking that is because of the 4 feedings that it's received so far. One of them was the feeding that went into making the bin even before the worms were introduced into here, where I don't recall if I added grit or not. And then there was also the feeding of the different grains being tested in here. It's, a system that's been around for 2 months now, more than 2 months at 64 days of age, maybe only a couple applications of grit. So we'll definitely want to include grit with today's feeding. I'm wondering how much the 15-day-old apple is holding up. There might even be some leaves of the strawberries. I don't even know if there's any other vital information on here that's worth reading, but let's get on with getting these guys fed. Besides giving them some chow today, combined chow for the first time, I also want to get something from my freezer, so I'll need to take a quick pause because I'm not prepared with anything other than the chow down here. I've also got some coffee that I'd like to get rid of, so between the worm chow, the coffee, and some kitchen scraps, I think we'll be able to provide them with a pretty generous feeding. This piece of paper bag, for whatever reason, suddenly became really popular, and I don't think we did anything out of the ordinary to try to, promote this sort of wear on it, other than, placing the plastic over it, which would cause the recirculation of moisture, and that in itself could have been enough to draw the worms out, but I guess we don't really have a top covering anymore. But I guess the good news is that we've got a whole bunch of nice bedding we could use with today's feeding. I've got my prepared bedding we could use. We'll use this as bedding too, since the coffee I'm bringing down includes a new filter. And we got some mites hanging out. These little guys are our cleanup crew. They whittle through dead worm carcasses. Probably responsible for breaking down a lot of the stuff that the worms are just not yet able to chew away on. I would even suggest that maybe they're responsible for burning through some of this paper as well. Let's get this out of here, mites and all, and they'll just come back with this when we reuse it as bedding, and the new filter that I bring down from the kitchen will be our new feeding zone indicator. I don't know what these are. Probably, what would I venture to guess? Maybe cucumbers? Cucumbers are just one of those things that include seeds. And the seeds, I think, are pretty easy to germinate and start growing. I really like the way the moisture is in this system with the bubble wrap on top. So the bubble wrap, allows air to travel all the way underneath it, everywhere, in between the bubbles that contact the material underneath it. Everything else is just air floating above. Obviously, it doesn't interact with the air outside in the room, which is a little bit drier, so the moisture coming off the bin creates just this little kind of humidity zone down beneath the plastic. One thing we observed last time we were in here was how these worms were just really burning through carbon, you know, the paper shreds and the leaves. The bedding was just getting destroyed. So last time we went through here, it was still pretty rich in paper bedding, but it had tons and tons of castings intermingled in it. But now when you look at it, it almost looks like there's no paper in it at all. I mean, there are little shreds here and there. Some of them are just dark in color because they're kind of damp. But I just watched the video from 15 days ago, and this thing was still primarily paper shreds. Obviously, we noted how dense the amount of castings mixed into it already was at that fairly young age. And now at 64 days of age, at about 2 months plus, there's there almost seems to be a shortage of bedding in here with the way these little guys are working through this stuff. So let's, before we check the other side, might as well go to the middle, which is where we added the last feeding. We included lots of old paper too. There was the old newspaper that went out here before the paper bag that we just took off as the top covering, and they did a number on that already, just like they did on our current top covering paper, which is now going to also join this stuff as bedding in today's feeding. There was other paper thrown in here too. I can't remember what. The apple peels I'm starting to see here because of their shiny surface, but it's so weird. Some of it actually looks like see-through cellophane tape. I don't know if they're little wives' tales or stories, but sometimes you hear about how, you know, apples are given like a protective shiny coat to make them look prettier on the shelf in the store. Whether that's true or not, I do not know. I'm just going to take the benefit of the doubt that this is just like, you know, a natural substance on the outer coat of the apple. It just needs a little bit more time, but I would hardly count it as leftovers. It's just residue, almost, in a way. Strawberry tops, the red part of the strawberry that was still on them was probably devoured long ago, days after being placed in here. I was expecting to see some of the leaves, though. Although 15 days later, it's hard to predict what you're gonna get, especially the way these worms in here have been burning through their bedding. It's so weird. There's just something about the way the stuff sounds as I crumble it. It doesn't sound natural. Strawberry tops. Do we have any strawberry tops? This is more bedding, more of the newspaper that used to be the top covering. I believe there was even traces of the paper that had been used for the grain and seed test. That was all thrown in here alongside the recycled newspaper as bedding. So we'll be sure to be generous with the bedding today, because obviously these guys need it. So much so that they've just gone ahead and started devouring our top covering paper to get what they need. So I'm glad I've got my pre-made shredded newspaper and cardboard and leaves collection and other things. All kinds of stuff to make the prepared bedding as cozy and comfortable for the worms as possible to use as their bedding. Stuff that they'll also want to eat as readily as bed in it. Is that the right way to express that? Before we proceed to going to get some food for them and placing it down in here, even though we got a nice opening here, I guess we're going to backfill it, because I'd like to also see how things on this side of the bin are progressing. Amazing. Still some paper down low. So many castings. They're just ripping through the stuff in this bin. I don't know. You might have saw on the green board that the estimated count of worms in this system is 928. And that was estimated over three different haul outs of the material that they'd been inhabiting. 3 different bags of material that that had just been put out to dry, you know. Let it air out a little bit so that it could crumble. And that's what we're going to check next, is all that material was just put into one big bag and left to sit further. But after all that time, you would have to think that worms have had to have hatched if there were cocoons. And, you know, when they're still itsy bitsy, they might not, you know, be cruising around so much. Maybe they're kind of camped out where they were hatched and just satisfied to find any sort of food that they bump into. I always kind of assume that worms have to be a little bit older before they get adventurous and start cruising around their environment. I could be completely wrong, though. I have no idea. But I always assume that it takes a little bit of time for the worms to get to some sort of a size where they can actually be rounded up and collected. And, you know, speaking of cocoons, I'm just seeing them all over the place. Once again, I'm kind of rifling through, but as I look down slowly, I can, you know, right away see a cocoon kind of caught up in this material here. Right here, too. I saw one. I don't know if I knocked it off. As the material gets darker, the cocoons being somewhat light in color become easier and easier to see. A lot of times it's just the speed at which you're working through the material dictates whether or not you're going to see any. So up until I slowed down there for a moment, I didn't see any. It was just, you know, catching one of them in the corner of my eye is what really caused me to slow down and want to see them a little bit better. But they're everywhere. It's pretty cool. All right, I think it is break time. Get them some food, and then we could pick up where we left off. Some of what they're getting is visible through this cellophane, but I'm not going to remove it. Otherwise, the stuff will come spilling out. Otherwise, we've got banana peels and coffee in here, as well as the worm chow, as well as all the bedding they're getting is going to count as food too. So before we proceed, why don't we start right in with the recycling of these old bits that we removed from the top as the top covering, the most recent top covering, because we've also got leftovers of the predecessor top covering. We got all kinds of awesome bedding here for these little guys to chew on. I guess we're going to have to come up with a new replacement top. Let's see, let's start combining some of their newly added foods in here. Then we can maybe start peppering in some of the leftovers, although the leftovers don't really look like a whole lot at this point. The leftovers look to me like just little pieces of cellophane, little crinkly pieces of apple peel, which might be all that's left. I didn't see any strawberry leaves yet, but I once again was moving through here pretty rapidly, so I may not have just slowed down enough to see one, but you know, this might be one, right? It sort of has that appearance to it, the shape with the leaves and maybe the very center of it. Looks pretty worked, but still intact to a large part. Probably very fragile. Just needs a little bit more time before the worms can actually, you know, gobble that up as well. So with this activity, patience is definitely an asset. If you're one of those people that's like, you know, when you were a kid, you were back seat and you're always constantly asking your parents, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Worm farming might not be for you. But if you can kind of, you know, just give the stuff time, whatever time it needs to get there, it'll pay off in the long run. Just got to be patient. We did create a pretty good sized hole here, but I do want to add a good bit of stuff. So I'm just starting to wonder if we're going to have sufficient space in here for all this material. I mean, the worm chow, we're going to sprinkle that in too, because that stuff just sort of falls into every little nook and cranny where there's room for it. That doesn't really occupy up a whole lot of space, but we got little, I'm not going to refer to what I think it's called because I think the word is wrong. Somebody said maybe a floret, but is that broccoli? I don't know. Broccoli was what I used to trying to bait the baby worms out of the cocoon nursery, so I'd really like to get over there. Don't want to spend too much more time getting this feeding in here, so why don't we just proceed with getting a good bit of it in here so that we can start combining. I got a good idea. I really want to go generous, so I'm going to grab not only a handful of my pre-made shredded paper cardboard mix here, But I've also got something that's been neglected a little bit. I used to use my little box here of leaves from my outdoor leaf bag collection. So I've got a whole bunch of this, and it's nice and aged, nice and dry. Something that I think the worms are really going to enjoy, and I also think something that's going to, just by its nature, give the finished castings nice texture. I think some people refer to how their castings get a little bit different in texture somehow. I don't know. I forget what the differences are exactly, but something about the fact that maybe because the worms were given only paper and cardboard as opposed to other tougher sorts of things to work on, maybe the castings were a little different than they could have been. I feel like I'm running out of room here, so maybe we'll just have to go really big at the end to make sure all of these items that we're feeding with are adequately covered up. Maybe we'll just pile a whole bunch of fresh bedding right across the top, a whole bunch of leaves or something, right? Because we're almost level with the rest of the material in here, and I think we've just massively increased the size of the whole system by doing this. So just looking around here, we've added grit, we've gotten rid of all the coffee, my tray here is empty, we've added worm chow. I guess we could even add more, right, if we wanted to. And then since we threw coffee and stuff over here, I'm thinking another handful of this. Yep, I'm being real generous here, aren't I? I think these worms are going to do a great job on it. They seem to be very productive. Tough worms, you know, since there are the worms that came out of my compost barrel. They were bought in January, so they'd already been outside in some really harsh conditions. So coming down here into my wormery must have been a real upgrade for them in terms of just an easier, more comfortable life in general. So I'd really like to still bring some of this over to sprinkle across the top, even if it's just a thin layer of it. And then we can come in and just cover everything, cover the entire top surface with, I like the idea of doing leaves. The leaves will give the whole thing a nice natural kind of appearance. And right below it, we're going to have a whole bunch of really awesome castings. And I got a feeling next time we come in here, this middle section is going to be just a big ditch. In fact, we'll even leave it mounded up a little bit. Right now it's a peak right down the center, but I got a feeling next time we come in here it's going to have collapsed, because these worms do a great job. And you know, 15 days, I'm wondering if waiting 15 days between now and the next feeding is a good idea. It might be better to pick up the pace and come back in here sooner. By sprinkling leaves across the entire top of the system, we're going to give the whole bin a nice natural look and feel. So yeah, a lot of dry stuff. I mean, the prepared shredded paper cardboard mix might have looked a little bit dry, but it is damp. This stuff is definitely going in dry. But if you look at all that frozen veggie matter that went in there, that's all going to kick off moisture as it thaws and as it gets broken down. So I don't think we're going to have a problem in here as far as moisture goes. I can always add moisture if I feel the need to, but right now I think the moisture level in here is pretty good. And I think we've included ingredients that should be in pretty good balance. So let's get this thing out of here. I want to see how the cocoon nursery is coming along 8 days after. Trying to see if we can start rounding babies up out of there with the broccoli. So let's switch containers. All right, we're gonna have to back off here a little bit and raise the camera. What have we here? Well, can only go so far, but that should give us a view of what's happening. Let's see here. What do we got? Some little flying insects have tried to make themselves at home here. I might have even tried using some of this white powder, the diatomaceous earth, to try to counteract their influence. Oh shoot. I still got this piece of paper I wanted to put on beneath the bubble wrap on the other container. I'll take care of that off camera. Sorry, got distracted. So yeah, and here too, I didn't really plan on hauling worms out or anything like that. I just wanted to see if there was any interest after 8 days. I'd like to think that there should be, or that there would be. So when we're done here, we'll just kind of put everything right back the way we found it, but I wanted to see if there's any chance of rounding up worms out of here. I just really felt like there really had to be worms in here in this material. Although it doesn't seem like the food we put out for them is creating much of a I don't know. Oh, well, you know what? It's interesting. Right near where the food was, we've got some worms right there on the perimeter. Because what I've been doing here, in addition to putting that bait in here, is coming in here on a pretty regular basis to apply moisture with my squirt bottle to keep all this material nice and damp and cozy for the worms to want to be in. So it is possible that they're just coming up for the moisture. But I do see lots and lots of little itsy bitsy worms and all the material going all the way around. This guy over here with the clitellum, I don't know, this little guy wasn't born here. This was just a straggler, didn't get rounded up when I was doing the roundup of worms and moving them out, moving the worms over into the bin we just fed. And here and there, a couple were left behind. So either way, at some point, you know, I think we'll be able to do maybe a more effective rounding up of the worms somehow. I'm not sure how exactly yet, but this, I guess the broccoli might not be the best bait for that. Maybe we'll have to try something else. But that'll be at some point in the future when we think it's really time to try to get the worms out of this stuff. It is almost planting season, you know. We're about a month away from the last frost date in my grow zone, or my hardiness zone, or whatever it's called. So soon I'll be able to make good use of this stuff, but until then, no hurry. Let's let the worms keep nibbling away at that little food we put in there for them. I'm not even going to treat that as bait anymore. We'll just treat that as a little snack. And then at some point in the future, we'll make a more concerted effort to try to really get the worms out so that the material can be used out in the garden. So I think we're almost done here. I've got a few things I got to put away and clean up, but I'm not going to take your time with that. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.